So I realize watching posts and comments, especially with this Trump administration, that people don't understand DEI. You have people who are very pro DEI and people who are very against DEI. So I wanted to make a short little video about that. But because this is a sensitive topic, let me explain what this video is not. This video is not an apology for white colonialism, an apology for American slavery, the institutions thereof. Um, and honestly, it's not even an indictment of the topics at hand. It's just simply an explanation of what they are, leaving the viewer to decide for themselves what level of research they'd like to do on their own to formulate their own educated opinions about what it is. With that said, to understand DEI, you have to understand CRT, and to understand CRT, you have to understand what Black communism is. Black communism has been around since the 60s. Never gained a whole lot of traction. If you want to do some research on that, there's, of course, the Black Panther Party, BPP, RAM, the Revolutionary Action Movement. And I want to say there's a Black Workers National Party, and all three of them essentially felt the same core concept, right? And so, what is Black communism? It's communism, but it redefines who the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, and the landed aristocracy are, instead of just simply the working class and the shopkeepers and merchants. Those are petite bourgeois, or the large scale business owners being just bourgeoisie, and landed aristocrats being plantation owners and things like that. It frames it into the blacks or the proletariat, and they're the ones who need to rise up. And it puts whites into the bourgeoisie and the landed aristocrats. By doing that, it's a way to rationalize their stations in life, where they are. It's a way to view America through that lens. It never gained a lot of traction in the 60s and 70s. There was some political violence, like there is today. I think the most notable of those groups was, of course, the Black Panther Party. The fist raised salute. We saw that in the Olympics. We've seen that in a number of other places. But it never caught any kind of mainstream attention, partly because, communists as a percent of society is very small, blacks being a small percent of American society, and then communists a smaller percent of that. There just wasn't a large enough group. We really didn't see this movement gain any kind of inertia, really until the internet. And I think what the internet gave it was reach of ideas. The other fundamental change that the movement had was it started to include more members into the proletariat, right? The common idea of communism is that the proletariat is the largest group, right? But in the case of Black Panther Party and RAM and anyway, the third one is that they were just too small of a group to gain any kind of inertia. They were never going to have enough people to rise up and overthrow the systems of government that they believed to be wrong. So what we've seen through since really 2014 and onwards, with the help of the institutions, is this more pervasive spreading of the ideology to include more groups. But to be the proletariat and to lump these groups together, you had to create this intersectionalism, as you may have heard it called. And that's essentially the glomming of groups together, no matter how disparate they may actually be. So we've seen this to include, in some cases, Islamic practitioners. We've seen this to be LGBTQIA+, to lump them into this group, right? And because if you want to overthrow a system of government, you need to have an enemy, right? The enemy is that government. And in the case of this ideology, is the whites who historically have oppressed these people, and they represent this government that needs to be overthrown. So, what is critical race theory then? So, critical race theory is a framework, it's the logic that the black communists use to justify what they're doing. So, critical race theory, just to briefly recap, is a wayward Portuguese trading ship was running out of food. It ends up in Virginia. It trades some indentured servants to the colonists. There was no legal definition of slaves in the colonies at that point in time. That would come nearly 150 years later. They traded people for food, and then they went on their merry, happy way. This framework says because of this event, everything else that followed was racist. And if you can rewrite the beginning of America and frame things in such a way, then it justifies the belief that, well, of course, this country was built by whites, they oppress black people and other minorities like Native Americans, etc. It's intrinsically bad and it must be overthrown, right? Which is what the communists want. What CRT is not is historically complete, and it doesn't claim to be, right? Nicole Hannah-Jones in her 1619 project, she does have historical sources in there, and those historical sources are accurate quotes and citations. And they're real people who had real thoughts and wrote about real things at the time in which they occurred. It's incomplete in the sense that, are there any interviews of Captain John Smith, who, went off with Pocahontas, etc.? Everybody knows that part of the story. What it doesn't talk about is how Captain John Smith was enslaved by Barbary pirates who happened to be North Africans, sold over to the Ottoman Empire, and he broke away, walked all the way across Europe, and ultimately captained a ship back to America. It is not complete in the sense that it doesn't talk about how the Creeks enslaved, the Cherokee enslaved the Creek. Iroquois enslaved Huron. It doesn't talk about, it does make a big point that chattel slavery was begat by white colonialists, which is just patently false. It is false because the oldest writings of chattel slavery, meaning people sold in markets like cattle, their kids are slaves. They will never be released from slavery except by the mercy and graces of their owners. Goes all the way back to 3500 BC. You can read about it in ancient Sumerian texts, Mesopotamian texts. It's old. It's been around a long time. Is it a justification for it? No, of course not. It's evil in all of its forms. But the point of this is to say that CRT fails merits because it's historically incomplete. Whites are not inherently evil, and they don't need to be put in quarters of classrooms and scolded and made to feel bad. Is that all CRT teaches? No, and it is right and accurate to teach about the horrors of slavery as practiced in the United States, not just slavery up to the Civil War, but, the Jim Crow laws and the redlining thereafter. All of these things were terrible, okay? But so that's what CRT is. CRT is a justification of who the oppressors are on behalf of black communists. So what is DEI? DEI is the political acceptance of that belief and consequences thereof. So DEI is, when I say DEI, I mean diversity, equity, and inclusion, all capital letters, right? The official government practice to discriminate against whites, to discriminate against certain groups on behalf of blacks, LGBTQIA+, and Islam, Muslims in certain contexts, even though they have wildly different views as, three different groups. So DEI, we've seen multiple cases of this discrimination playing out. For instance, there's over 1,000 white males suing the FAA for discrimination in hiring. It's an EEOC complaint. It is in practice today. Companies like IBM are being sued for their DEI policies. These are all against the law and prohibited. I think when it comes to little DEI, I think it's amazing. Lowercase diversity, equality, and inclusion is one of the best defining traits of America and is part of our redemption arc as a country. I think when it comes to capital DEI, it is the opposite of the values of America. But see, now that in conclusion of this video, you understand that DEI is a political practice of CRT, which is the framework of beliefs used to overthrow the government, which is what the Black communists believe. Now you can start to make sense of this. I hope that helps, and good luck in just study and decide for yourself, right? Do you have an opinion? Have you seen this in play? What would you like to see happen? Everybody deserves an equal chance, an equal shot. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect and as an individual on their own merits. See what you think. Hope you liked the video.